Nostalgia. It's one hell of a drug, and there is a reason why a lot of people can't move on from it in hopes of finding something new that is equally good, because in their mind, however they remember it, was the ultimate life experience, with every piece of the puzzle coming together so perfectly for them. It's a feeling that truly can't be replicated.
Hostile soldier, due east of your location.
My name is Ray, and I will be your voice actor for today, while Lanky is paying me in that sweet, sweet exposure that will pay my rent just very nicely.
Hey, what's wrong with that?
Oh, I don't know, Tom. Maybe it's because you don't fucking pay.
Anyway, many years later, after so many games and so many attempts, the developers of this current generation, the ones who grew up with certain games, are trying their best to replicate that nostalgic feeling that we all once felt. But it cannot be replicated, because it's all an illusion in our heads. It's just an idea of how we think we felt back then. There was nothing to challenge our belief that whatever piece of media we consumed or were consuming back then was in fact perfect. People can't really empathize the exact feeling of nostalgia, because that nostalgia is unique and different for everyone, and they have their own idea of what makes something perfect. So when we talk about Battlefield 4, the Battlefield 4, nostalgia is literally on steroids when people talk about this game. Battlefield community to this day considers it to be the ultimate Battlefield game, the Battlefield game that defines what the Battlefield franchise should be. Is Battlefield 4 the Battlefield game we always wanted and needed? Can Electronic Arts and DICE just re-release this game with no big complicated changes on a new generation of consoles and still be the perfect Battlefield game? Yes, but with a very big caveat. It's extremely complicated, and we will do our best to explain. First, we need to understand the history behind this game. Battlefield 4 had a disastrous launch. Server problems, crashes, freezes, bugs, netcode, progression simply not working. Putting a silencer on a specific marksman rifle would mute literally the entire server for all players in that server.
Okay, come here. Find me, I'm behind you. Turn around. Yeah. Alright, you ready? People went, what the fuck?
You can't, and we're not making this shit up. It damaged DICE's reputation so bad that Electronic Arts announced that future DLC expansions were being delayed so that DICE can focus on fixing the game. Now, does that sound familiar? With all of that in mind, there's a huge difference between Battlefield 4 and Battlefield 2042. Now, we won't go into huge detail because it's entirely a separate video, but beneath all the problems Battlefield 4 had back then, the problem was never the gameplay itself, generally speaking. Battlefield 4 had an amazing foundation to be really fun and an interesting Battlefield game. When it worked, it was peak Battlefield. Movement felt fantastic. Shooting was satisfying. Maps were visually impressive. Vehicles felt extremely well designed in terms of controls. To this day, it is still the best vehicle mechanics this franchise has ever had. New game modes felt exciting and complemented the game very well. Quite a big number of guns and maps to explore. Back then, this was considered to be an overkill, and that was without DLC expansions. The presentation of this game was spot on, and that resonated well with the Battlefield player base. When the game worked, it was the most fun you could ever have with a Battlefield game. All the problems Battlefield 4 had were technical, not the gameplay itself.
Think about what Battlefield 4 was: 64-player multiplayer, giant maps, 1080p, Levolution that was changing the gameplay design in an emergent way. There is a chance there are things you are going to miss through the development cycle, and you end up in a situation we had with Battlefield 4. For me, the situation we had was unacceptable. For the team, it was unacceptable. We have worked tirelessly since then to make sure the gameplay experience got to where it absolutely should have been at launch, and we're focused on that, and we continue to deliver value to that player base. But when you do things like that, you can never guarantee. It would be disingenuous for me to sit here and say, we will never have an issue again, because that would mean we were never going to push the boundaries again. And I don't want to be that company. I want to be a company that pushes to lead and innovate and be creative. but you can start to do things that give you a better handle and a better view about what the potential challenges might be.
For better or worse, Battlefield 4 was Battlefield 3 on steroids. And there's a reason why a lot of people wish they would combine Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4 into one game. Because spiritually, these games cannot coexist without each other in any shape or form. Comparing that to Battlefield 2042, even if DICE manages to fix all the technical problems like performance, menu, HUD, or any other technical stuff that are dragging the game down, it still won't be fun. It will not have a fairy tale redemption story like Battlefield 4, because 2042 has absolutely no foundation to stand on. And that is why you can't compare Battlefield 4's launch month with 2042's launch month. Even though Battlefield 4 was a complete disaster, just like Battlefield 2042, people kept playing. Regardless of the bullshit players had to endure, the game was still fun when it worked. It was the best Battlefield experience DICE could ever offer. And of course, on a deeper level, no game is perfect. Like any other AAA shooter, Battlefield 4 had deeply rooted problems that couldn't be fixed in a patch or two. Maps were hit and miss. Vehicle balance was all over the place. Soldier flinching and Zuzu jumping.
There's your med kit. Pick it up.
Okay, first enemy down.
That's my reaction.
Fuck. Ready?
I'm ready.
Counter-knifing, extremely inconsistent. In some cases, the game was so bloated with gadgets and explosives that literally every class in the game was an absolute danger to any vehicle user. For example, Straw Rocket Launcher was the ultimate anti-air weapon, and pilots had no way to counter it. The game never notified the pilots that a rocket was coming their way, because the game treated that straw rocket as an RPG projectile. But it just happens that you can guide that straw rocket as a smart rocket. This was never meant to be an anti-air weapon, and yet, it was the best. Certain modes were completely unplayable on certain maps, because all of the maps were forced to accommodate all of the base game modes. So Rush, one of my personal, most favorite modes, barely worked on half of the maps. And you know what? Here's a list of the problems because this video is getting too long. And even I can come to terms with the fact that Battlefield 4 was never perfect, and never will be. But it had everything it needed to be one of the best Battlefield games DICE had ever produced. And in a sense, they did. They wanted to be ambitious. They wanted it to be the best of the best. And they achieved that as time went on through development. People don't really get it sometimes, but the horrible launch of Battlefield 4 was actually a blessing in disguise that changed the whole gaming industry forever, and in a good way. Not because it showed the other gaming studios and publishers that releasing quote-unquote unfinished games is bad for business, but it was the first ever AAA shooter that encouraged their player base to take part in the development process. Thus, Battlefield Community Test Environment was created, also known as CTE. It was a separate client of the game with private DICE servers, where developers were testing patches before they'd hit the retail build, and experimenting new game mechanics that may or may not be introduced into the full game. All players that bought into Premium, the so-called Battlefield 4 Season Pass, had access to CTE by default, and they were allowed to be involved in the development of the game. There were separate forums, Skype chats, Reddit posts, developer-organized playtests, and feedback loops, and so much more.
Down the flag, requesting cover support in our grid.
Lanky himself even managed to have some input when Operation Outbreak was in development, as his proposed layout for Capture the Flag is featured in the game. CTE was the main driving force, why all of us are being extremely nostalgic about Battlefield 4. CTE is the one main reason why we think Battlefield 4 is one of the greatest, if not the greatest Battlefield game to date, because it gave the player base hope that no matter how fucked up everything is, the game is going to go in the right direction inevitably. CTE was such a success that some Battlefield community members managed to land jobs at DICE Sweden and DICE Los Angeles because of their amazing contribution to the community test environment. The reason why Battlefield games have 60Hz servers in the first place was thanks to the community testing environment. And other gaming studios watched on with full curiosity for for obvious reasons, because it was literally a game changer that showcased that DICE is still one of the most talented gaming studios in the industry. Regarding the expansions, it was a mixed bag. Some expansions were crowd favorites, some were abandoned almost instantly. But the expansions were so unique from each other, offering different types of maps and modes that were so different from the rest of Battlefield 4. It brought some excitement to the game, regardless if you dislike some aspects of that particular expansion. And that was clearly noticed by a lot of people outside the Battlefield player base bubble, which encouraged people to give Battlefield 4 another chance. Because the player numbers were rising and Battlefield 4 was finally getting a lot of positive feedback after the disastrous launch, DICE Los Angeles announced that more content would be coming to the game, all of it free. The success of CTE and DICE's commitment to continue supporting Battlefield 4 beyond their legal season pass obligations ensured the player base is not going anywhere. Battlefield 4 became the very first proper live service game, while other studios were still trying to understand what that term meant. It was such a success that it overshadowed their next Battlefield game that was supposed to be released a year later after Battlefield 4, Battlefield Hardline. Now, okay, Battlefield Hardline is a separate story entirely, but because Battlefield 4 was only getting better and more content was coming our way at the time, Battlefield Hardline was almost destined to fail. And when the game came out, of course, Battlefield players switched to Hardline, albeit temporarily. And just a month in, Battlefield Hardline was already considered to be abandoned, mainly because Battlefield player base went back to Battlefield 4, as community test environment was already teasing new content that would be coming to the game, which included the night maps and the community map project. No matter what positive changes Battlefield Hardline added to the franchise, or that they had their own community testing environment, it was nowhere near that exciting as Battlefield 4, especially when the new free content is being developed with the help of the Battlefield community itself. And this is why we are extremely nostalgic about Battlefield 4. It's not because it became one of the best, if not the best Battlefield game in the franchise, but because the player base itself was responsible for making Battlefield 4 as one of the best Battlefield games that ever existed. Every single DICE developer that worked on Battlefield 4 and the CTE, they deserve all the full praise for what they have achieved, and their ambition had no limits. But if it wasn't for the passionate Battlefield community and their trust in the current developers, their hard work would have never been noticed. Now the game is nowhere near perfect, and the game would feel really rough comparing it to the competition if it came out now, but it still would be a really good Battlefield game. Even if Electronic Arts would re-release Battlefield 4 on next-gen consoles with minimal changes, it would still have a good, healthy player base, all because that player base knows that piece of their passion for Battlefield franchise is still immortalized in Battlefield 4 in some shape or form. And that's a beautiful thing that you really can't replicate with numbers and data.
But the biggest difference between I'm not going to compare them again, but I do, between DICE and Activision, in my opinion. I have played both of the games for since the first ones came out, and the biggest difference in my opinion, Call of Duty has always felt like a company-owned game, while Battlefield has been felt like a fan base owned game. You understand what I mean? And
Yeah.
in my opinion, it felt like they have switched for the last 5 years. Now it feels like the Battlefield games are more controlled by higher ups than it was for 5 years ago, 10 years ago.
Actually, a good point, yeah.
That makes you sad to think about it.
Yeah,
too.
I know. It makes me sad and happy at the same time. Sad for Battlefield and happy for COD.
To this day, Electronic Arts still regrets that they couldn't take Battlefield 4 even further, as it's still one of their most played games they have ever published. EA Chief Financial Officer Blake Jorgensen said Battlefield 4 was a missed opportunity, adding that the game could have made even more money if it had a quote-unquote live service component. And in a sense, he's not wrong. And Electronic Arts, being a corporate entity as they are, were too slow to realize what kind of an impact Battlefield 4 had on the whole gaming industry. And it went full steam ahead with Battlefield 1, killing all chances of Premium 2.0 ever leaving pre-production. At the end of the day, let's not be sad that Battlefield 4 ended. Let's be happy that it happened, and in the way that it happened. as it is definitely one of the best redemption stories the gaming industry has ever produced. Thank you everyone for watching the video. We hope that we've opened your eyes in some way, shape, or form and made you think at least a little bit. Leave a like, leave a comment, leave some form of engagement, as we greatly appreciate that for all the hard work that we put in. Now, if you excuse me, I have to go collect a check from Tom.
Oh, fuck you. Why can't you be nice?